Hi, welcome everyone. Je suis Benoît Jourdouin, responsable des activités culturelles ici au musée. Nous vous accueillons donc pour une rencontre organisée pour l'exposition qui est tenue ici au Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal jusqu'au 28 mai prochain, qui s'appelle Parallèle, une autre histoire du design, une proposition de Jennifer Laurent, qui est conservatrice ici aux arts décoratifs et design. So, hello and welcome everyone to this conversation hosted by the Montreal Museum of Fine Art in conjunction with Parallel, a history of women in design, an exhibition curated by Jennifer Laurent, curator of decorative arts and design. We are thrilled to host this third conversation series called Lunch and Chat with a Designer today with our curator-in-chief, Mary-Dailey Desmarais. And today we welcome designer Tanya Aguiñiga, whose work is featured in the exhibition. So before we start, please let me take a few seconds to acknowledge the financial contribution of the Terra Foundation for American Art, as well as our public partners, Government of Quebec, Council of the Arts, Canada Council of the Arts, and Conseil des Arts de Montréal. Also, quick note, we are using the webinar mode of the Zoom platform. So please, if you have comments and questions, you can use the Q&A button right below the screen, and don't necessarily wait until the end to write your comments and questions. Just write them whenever they pop in your mind. And after the main conversation that will last about 30 to 40 minutes, there will be some time for me to read aloud your questions so that Tanya can answer them. So let me introduce you, Tanya, more formally. Tanya Aguiñiga was born in 1978 in San Diego and was raised in Tijuana, Mexico. She's an artist and craftsperson. She works with traditional craft materials like natural fibers and collaborates with artists and activists to create sculptures, installation, performances, and community art projects. Drawing from her upbringing as a binational citizen who crossed the border from Tijuana to San Diego Valley for school, Aguiñiga's work speaks of the artist's experience of her divided identity and aspires to tell the larger and often invisible stories of transnational community. She's the founder of AMBOS, that stands for Art Made Between Opposite Sides. I think we will talk about this in a second. It's an ongoing series of projects that provide a platform for binational artists. She was recently awarded the Latinx Artist Fellowship, the Heinz Award, and also she has received the American for the Arts Johnson Fellowship for Artists Transforming Communities in 2018. Her work can be found in collections like the Hammer Museum, the LACMA, the Smithsonian's Cooper Hewitt Museum, and Renwick Gallery, among others. So I welcome to you both, and Mary, if you want to, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Benoit. I'll also add in the collection of the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, thanks to a gift from the Sewer program. So we're super excited about that and want us very much to be on the list. Thank you for the introduction, Benoit, and thank you so much, Tanya, for taking the time to speak with me today. I'm really happy to be able to share this lunch hour with you. Go ahead.
Saw that. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, very excited to be here with you all.
Fantastic. So I think I'll just start by asking where you are now physically. It looks like we're in your studio. Maybe you can tell us what's happening there, where it is. Take us through a little bit.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to unplug from the power so I can be more mobile. Okay, there you are again. So my studio is in a Quonset hut. I don't know if I'm sure you guys have them in Montreal too. It's those metal like round buildings that are usually used for like airplane hangars. So the space is, yeah, this big round building. And I can take you around. So I'm actually in Los Angeles. This is where my studio is. And right now we're in the middle of constructing thousands of like meters of this like party fringe for an installation. So there's tons of stuff, tons of party supplies everywhere. For this 40-foot diameter geodesic dome that is going to be up for 6 months outside in Atlanta, Georgia at the High Museum of Art. And so that, yeah, we're building all of these different, there's this big giant shape that you can kind of see behind me. That's part of the geodesic dome's fringe that we're building. And then the space is also getting filled with all of these hybrid party supplies from different cultures. And also getting all of these, it's papel picado, it's like cut paper that's traditionally Mexican, but through different workshops with 8 different community centers. I had folks work on designing different storytelling from different cultures. And so then these were the ones that were selected to get cut out in different languages. And again, from different cultures, just kind of sharing a little bit about how, you know, all of our cities are made up of tons of different cultures and there's so much intersectionality. So yeah, so that's a view of one of the spaces, and then where is beyond that little door right there. And then I can show you because it's pretty amazing. I didn't open the door, but downstairs,
Whoa.
yeah. So downstairs I rent from, let me see if you can see it better there, from a tow yard. So it's, there's all these cars that they're working on down there.
That's
But
amazing.
yeah, so then on the other side of the wall is another space that we have for when we build big, like large, dirty things. But on the, let's see if my finger, if I can get it to work.
Yeah,
This,
we can see.
yeah, so this door, this is like a big giant door that opens. And then let me see if I can, if the Wi-Fi will work. But on the other side of that is the LA River.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so we're really lucky. Yeah, so that green area is the LA River, which has a bunch of like migratory birds and a bunch of water because it keeps raining. And then on this other side is this beautiful like lumpy hills and the tow yard where all the cars are. So
What a fantastic space with so many mixed elements in it: nature, culture, cars, industry. That's really interesting.
it is really interesting. But yeah, no, it's the shape of it is pretty amazing, and we really love being on the river.
I love those hanging figures. They're so beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, we have to make a bunch more of them. And then 20 custom designed piñatas are waiting for us in Atlanta that were also designed by community members.
Wow, that's so exciting. I actually, you know, I know that you, if I'm not mistaken, came to your art practice through community engagement in Mexico, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe you could talk to us about that process. What brought you to those kinds of community collaborations, and how that became really at the heart of the work that you do?
Yeah. So growing up at the age of 4, I started crossing the border to go to school in the US. So my family never moved to the US, but because myself and my dad are US citizens and we could cross back and forth without them stopping us. So my dad ended up getting a job in the US side. And at the time, they would just drop me off at my grandmother's house, who had moved to the US at that point also. And so just crossing back and forth every day for 14 years until I was 18. So much of our like border is shaped by migration. And so much of it is shaped by, you know, different waves of folks that arrive to our town trying to make it to the US, and then kind of how the US handles like immigration and how policies are constantly changing. I started to get involved in making art. I was in community college. I'm not sure what the equivalent is in Canada, but it's like not the four-year university. It's like a 2-year university that you take classes for very low, like if your family doesn't have money, and it's mostly like first generation Americans and like migrant students that are there. So I started taking classes in community college, and there I met my mentor, Michael Schnorr, who was part of the Border Art Workshop. So he had already been, since the 80s, working on how to use art as a way to draw attention to like different border issues, whatever those may be. So, you know, related to human rights, or just related to like culture, or just, you know, like exploring identity. And so then from the age of 19, I kind of got brought into this world of learning how to use art as a tool for community empowerment and for different forms of expression than you typically, at least in the 80s and 90s, used to see in museums, you know? So before social practice was a word, before like public practice was a word, before all this stuff, we were working on a bunch of this, like different community building projects that were human rights related, and then some that were just strictly like migrant rights related.
It's kind of amazing that as a young child, you physically cross the border every day. As you mentioned, there are a lot of people who are trying to make their way to the States who came through Tijuana. And I guess I wonder what that was like for you as somebody who had the ability to cross, and then also in contact with so many people who did not. And I imagine just the physicality of making that traverse every day must have been really powerful. That's a lot for a child to undertake.
I mean, I think as a child, I would never have called it powerful. I would just have called it difficult and at sometimes traumatic. Because it is really, you know, like very real, you know, like experiencing like situations where you have to be confronted with like death, you know, when you're in the morning, like on your way to like first grade, you know? And so there's a lot of super intense parts about it that I would never want to put anybody through like that experience, that journey. But it is, you know, what's made me have a very different vantage point to like, you know, what art can do, what art is for, like what is art, you know, having seen ways that like through community engagements and through kind of pointing out to people a lot of their like blind spots, of like, you know, if you don't have that lived experience, it's difficult to imagine the complexity of all the like emotional, you know, like constraints and psychological experience and physical needs that people have in that site, and how it affects society that's already existing, how it shifts, you know, the culture in these places, and how that affects politics, and then how all of that stuff just, you know, keeps getting piled on. Anyways, there's all these different things that I think those of us that have, you know, these weird lived experiences in these very regional places, just can like bring, like shed a lot of light on things that people outside of our region don't usually think about. But I think that these issues affect all of us. Like we all live with borders, you know, and so it's a lot of things that it's just about thinking about how difficult that stuff was, and thinking about how do I make it better for the next generation? How do I make the current situation more humane for people that are stuck at the border? You know, especially as the global South like consistently needs to migrate north, you know, all around the globe. Just like how do we live better together?
I want to talk on a related note about your choice to use fiber in so much of your work, and why that is an important aspect of your practice. I actually have, I'll share an image on the screen. That's something else. But here's you actually completely immersed in a fiber installation at the Craft and Folk Art Museum in California. So maybe you could talk to us about that choice and what the kind of threads, for lack of a better word, what that means to you symbolically.
Yeah, so it's so funny and like so sweet to see like way younger pictures of myself. Oh my God, I look so young. Anyways, so my career started with furniture design. So I have a bachelor's and a master's in furniture design. And so I started my whole practice was learning how to, work with different traditional craft media. So learning how to work with wood, learning how to work with metal, learning a little bit about how to work with fiber, and then also jewelry and metalsmithing and ceramics. And so when I was in the beginning of like working with furniture, and I kind of used it in the beginning as an escape to like kind of have very controlled parameters, because so much work that I was involved with at the border with the Border Art Workshop was so emotional and like such like heavy lifting. That design just gave me a really like nice little place to put, like I can measure this and it can be perfect. And so it wasn't until I moved away from the border region and moved to New England to study at RISD at the Rhode Island School of that I started kind of thinking about, design is also a place that has space for culture and identity. I just need to figure out what that looks like for me. And so once I figured that out, because I always had very sculptural tendencies, but I thought that I needed to work just strictly on like functional, sellable things as a way of living. And so once I started thinking about, okay, how do I bring culture into these conversations around like the domestic sphere and like the things that we buy and like surround ourselves with, that's when I started getting more into the exploration of fiber. And so it kind of started with like, let me see if you can see it. This chair is like really hard to see. Let me bring it. This is black. You can't really see that it's like hand felted.
Wow.
But let me.
Oh, now we can see a little bit better. Okay, I definitely did not see that from.
Yeah, so I think that's the whole thing because it's so dark in here. But yeah, so it's all like covered in wool and it's all like felted around the structure.
Wow.
So all of it is just, like covered with like wet felted. Anyway, so then I started trying to figure out ways to talk about like industrial processes and things. And how do I, kind of translate the experience of growing up in a very warm, colorful, very textural Mexico. And then at the same time, every day having to spend half of my life in the US, which is very like gridded, concrete, organized. And so then through fiber, I was able to kind of bring in a little bit of that texture and that warmth and start kind of the dialogue between, like how do we explore identity through like functional objects. And once I started learning about felting, then I started getting the like bug and started learning about weaving and then started traveling to a lot of different communities all over Mexico. After I got out of school to try to figure out, okay, like, where is my, like, how can I dive deeper into the exploration of craft in Mexico and what is made in different regions? Who is it that's making it? Why is it made that way? What are people's use of techniques and materials and how is it related to like their sense of self, their sense of like cultural patrimony and connection to land. And so at that point, I had won this really big award. And so I had spent time in Chiapas in southern Mexico. It's a very like Mayan region. And so that's where I learned how to do backstrap weaving. So it's a weaving where you tie the fiber to a tree or a post, and then there's no loom. The loom is the tension between yourself and the tree. And so once I like learned that and thought about, you know, that we don't have to, that fiber and the things that we make can be completely emotionally connected to our physical body and movement and our emotional states. It just kind of like exploded my ideas of how you make work, you know, and I started thinking, oh, like I, for so long, have been working on these big European looms because that's what I was taught in school. But I never questioned why I was working on looms. And I never questioned, is there other ways of working in the process of making fiber that's more connected to my like cultural like identity and my sense of, you know, wanting to reclaim space and decolonize my studio. So then at that point, I started working on developing a bunch of my own methodologies for making, and started working off of a loom, and started working in ways where there's no like up or down, there's no like front or back, there's no actual like technical expertise needed for anyone to participate in helping us make stuff in the studio or in workshops that I do. So it's all kind of based on like using your intuitive like movements in your hands, kind of like your own writing. And yeah, just really like feeling through your body rather than thinking about what you're making.
I'd love for you to talk specifically about the piece that's in the exhibition, Parall, which we're so thrilled to have you participating in. It's called Neck Piece, and it dates around 2015. I feel it brings together many of the kind of issues you're talking about, and love for you to just speak about it here.
Yeah. So I started working with rope because I was trying to figure out a way, in the beginning, I was trying to figure out a way to make furniture out of industrial materials still. And so kind of like, you know, like jumping off from like this industrial folding chair, thinking about, like how fiber that's, you know, that's not highbrow, like things that you can find at the hardware store. Like how can, because for me, a lot of the use of materials, I like to think about, you know, if my like working class family or like my working class dad can understand the beauty in something that is, you know, made out of like everyday materials, then I've succeeded in connecting to people who are usually left out of conversations in design or fine art. And so, so I started exploring like, all right, how can I work with cotton, and how can I work with materials that are related to like the creation of fabric, you know, and how can I explore like what gets communicated through fabric. And so I started working with this rope, and at first I was making these, and I can show it again when we go back to the big camera. I started making these bracelets, and then when I started making the bracelets, I found a local, he's not here anymore, he went out of business in the pandemic, but a very old rope manufacturer here in Los Angeles. And so then he had just spools and spools and spools, and like 3 different buildings just filled with all of this old like marine rope. And so I would just go and find things that had really beautiful character. So like this one, the way that the cotton is spun wasn't all the same. So some of it is spun into these tiny like double twist strands, and then other parts of it are very loose. So the fiber itself, he didn't even remember what it had been originally made for, the rope, because it was so special and had this really amazing texture to it. And so I started kind of in thinking about how do we take back a lot of things that are, that are everyday and that are from hardware stores and turn them into expressions of beauty and of, I think part of it is like thinking through class, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so then, so I started making a bunch of these rope necklaces that are kind of like sculptural wearables that were made out of rope. And so a lot of them, and I can again show it.
Here, I'll go back. I'll stop the share so you can show some of those objects and you can see them.
Okay, so a lot of them were like making, so it's the same rope, just much smaller. Making, these very like, very chunky sculptural things, and the bracelets again. So for years, so for years I made like thousands of these bracelets and thousands of these necklaces. And
they're so cool. Do you dye them? You dip in dye?
Yeah, so I also, part of I think what made them really successful for so long is that it was before the dip dye trend. So it was before, we were used to seeing tons of stuff that was like half dipped and stuff.
Right.
And so, so for years we would make literally like thousands of them. And so then part of that was also that the studio from the beginning, I really wanted to have different levels of like engagement, but also different like price point entries for people. That if they wanted to support what the studio does, they could, if they can't afford like a big, massive piece for their house, a big weaving, then maybe they could afford, like something small to wear. And for a long time I was making like tiny felted birds and all of these different things. So it was a really nice way in the beginning of the studio for us to, like engage with a lot of people from different socioeconomic levels, but also employ a lot of people, and train people like how to run a small business, train a lot of folks on like how to work with textiles and different structures and possibilities.
That's such a beautiful project. How many people are we talking about here?
So at our biggest, we were 11. And then now we're down to just 2 of us.
Okay. I'd love to talk about another project that you have done, which Benoit mentioned briefly in his introduction, the Ambos project, art made by opposite sides, right? So if I got the name right. And I love that too, because Ambos sort of evokes the word ambulatory, like walking a bit. And so can you tell us about that project and what was the inspiration for it?
So again, because I grew up crossing the border every day, and because of my involvement with the Border Art Workshop really early in my career, I constantly, like in all my like travels and kind of explorations of what craft can be and what design can be and what art can be, and how, like I can use tools from all of these different like ways of working to solve, larger problems. I kept thinking about, how do I find a way to go back to Tijuana and help like just bring up conversations that are difficult about, things that really affected my community. And so my family's still down there. So we go often. It's only 2 hours away from LA. So it's very close to the border here. And so I really wanted to do something that engaged folks in the beginning that just were crossing the border, because the majority of people that are crossing the border are people that are US citizens. They're people that have green cards. So they're all people that pay taxes. They're, you know, a big part of the economies on the US side, on like the entirety of the US-Mexico border. And, you know, those of us that are US citizens also, you know, vote or hopefully vote. And so, but none of our stories and none of our needs and none of our, like, we don't usually talk about crossing the border every day or the fact that our families live on the Mexican side, mostly because of stigma, because so many people in the US, you know, are afraid of Mexico. And even a lot of Mexicans that live in the US are also afraid of Mexico. And so then they, even though they have the ability to cross back and forth, a lot of people, you know, like won't cross and have not seen their mom or their grandma for 20 years, even though all they need to do is just cross the border and they can legally come back. But just how it is, you know, the media portrays our communities in a very different way than the reality is. And so, yeah, because you never talk about like, oh, I actually live in Mexico, but I work in the US. You do it by yourself and you do it in silence. And, you know, and the process of crossing the border is very, very militarized, very, it's very scary, you know, to do. And so then, in the beginning, I started Ambos just focusing on the transnational community that was crossing in cars. And when I first got funding for it, because I had been writing grants to try to do it and nobody would give me money. And then when Trump started saying that all Mexicans were rapists and drug traffickers, then suddenly I started getting a bunch of funding.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And so then the project was started when Trump was running for office the first time. So in 2016 is when we started the project. And it started, a lot of it started with this border people project, where we went to people crossing the border. Let me see if I can, this light is hard. Trying to get people in their cars and asking them, giving them this postcard with 2 strings on it. And then we would say these 2 strings represent the relationship between US and Mexico, our 2 selves at either side of the border, and or our mental state while crossing. And then it said, please make a knot. And so then people would make a knot and then we would flip it and we would ask them, what are your thoughts when you cross this border? And then they would write different reflections of their life, or, you know, if they didn't cross, then they would just write about, their relationship to the border. And so then that's how the project kind of started. And we had a lot of different collaborators that, you know, were photographers, sound artists, radio, like storytellers, all kinds of different mediums that were engaged in how do we talk about the issues that our community is facing and has historically faced, and make it a space where people can visualize the community and understand that they're not going through it alone, and that there are many of us, and that we're connected to each other. And so then the knots that were made would get tied to each other every day. And then we would make these columns that signified all the people that participated that day. And we ended up taking the project through the entirety of the US-Mexico border. It took us 3 years, but we engaged over 10,000 participants in the border people. And so we have we still have to figure out ways of making the archive accessible for folks. But we have, I think 7,000 of the postcards, because not everybody wanted to write. But so we have all these, just data of that kind of encapsulates the emotional state of all these different cities, border crossing cities on the Mexican side. And it's because we did it over 3 years, it encapsulated all these very difficult times, like when the US started taking children and separating them, families, and all of these very specific periods of time.
I think it's such a beautiful project, and again goes back a little bit to, thread, the kind of symbolism of making a knot between these two entities in the Kipu project, which is really, really moving. I wanted to show another image, which I believe is also related to the Ambos project. And I think, I'm not, hold on, let me see, can I do this? Why don't you move this? Is this backstrap? Would that be kind of the backstrap that you were talking about?
Yeah, but you usually don't tie yourself to another person. You usually tie yourself to, like I said, like a pole or a tree. So then this is a performance that myself and my friend Jackie Mesquita did through the US-Mexico border fence while we were on the road to do the border Kipu. And so Jackie is from Guatemala, and she had also learned backstrap weaving from the Mayan community in Guatemala. And so both of us feel very connected to weaving and wanted to do something that kind of recorded, you know, the tension in these really difficult spaces. Because again, like the movement of your body and how you interact with the fiber while it's tied to you is all recorded through like how loose the structure becomes. And so you're not allowed to touch through the border and you're not allowed to pass anything through the border. But this was one particular space that we felt safe at, where the Border Patrol actually drove away and gave us privacy to be able to like spend time there, like mourning and doing different performances of different ideas that we had while we were on the road. So yeah, so this is a performance that we did, and the piece got left on site. So we assumed that it just got cut off and thrown away afterwards. But so Jackie's on the Mexican side and I'm on the US side. And this was a site that was very, very important to Jackie in her migration story, which is why, yeah, when it felt safe to do it there, we went with it and did this kind of spontaneous performance.
Amazing. I'd like to just as a and thank you for sharing on this. I just think it's you know, a profound project, and to see these bodies working together, tied together across this physical and also, you know, metaphorical divide that has been so sensationalized, I guess, is really powerful. I suppose just in closing on my part, because I know we have a few questions from the audience, I'd like to talk about, bring it back to the project Parall. I guess that brings together artists from a different border, from across a different border, the northern border of the United States. It brings together artists from Canada and the United States. And maybe you could just share a little bit about what being included in this exhibition means for you.
No, I mean, it's so amazing. And I think that like even like when I was studying, like starting my like educational career and like, you know, being in college, one of the classes that was really, I think, transformative for me was this class that I took that was called Comparative History of the Americas. And so it was talking about history from Canada to Chile.
Oh, wow.
And usually, you know, like North America, or, you know, just gets thought of as, at least from here in the US, they just think of like North America as just like them.
Yes,
you know?
true.
Because
Very
like,
true.
you're America, and you're like, no, you're not. You're one of many of us.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think that, yeah, so for us, you know, people of Mexican descent, I think we're constantly pushing back against that. And like for us, a lot of that also includes thinking about Canada, because Canada has such a different model that, you know, like when we were in this class, you know, this comparative history of the Americas, one of the things that we learned about that was really amazing was learning about how like the Quebecois were able to protect language, like the original, you know, like founding of the country, and how for like Mexico, when they lost half of their land, you know, to the US, like all of that stuff got erased, and they didn't for any of us to hold on, you know, to our cultural ties to this land.
Yes.
And so, yeah, like thinking about, yeah, like your guys is like, at least from this side, that your immigration policies and some of the stuff that happens in Canada, I think has a lot of lessons for, you know, the rest of the Americas to learn from. So it's beautiful to kind of, you know, make a big knot around thinking about like our North American, you know, like relationships.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for being so generous with your insights and thoughts. I'll let other people in the audience ask a few questions because I know that time is running out. Benoit, do you want to take over?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. There are still some time for questions, so don't hesitate. If you have a question in mind, just write it down in the Q&A section. But there is already one from Roberta Kapolovich. She says, "Thank you for sharing your personal experience and art practice. How is your work received in Mexico?"
So it's very interesting. So in Mexico, it's not that received. And part of it is that, you know, we as like people from the in-between area, like border people, like people that are, you know, like too Mexican for the US, but too American for Mexico.
That's interesting.
Yeah, we get kind of like the opportunities for our work is less because we like it's interesting, like in talking to other friends that, you know, are also in the in-betweens of other worlds, like indigenous world and all these other worlds, or I guess like as others, you know, there's always these questions of authenticity. And so even though people obviously like really respond to like the beauty of some stuff, like I have still not had an exhibition in Mexico. And I have pieces in private collections, but not in any like institutions in Mexico. So it's interesting. And so the US, and the same thing in the US, a lot of like my work is collected by museums that are just craft-based or museums that are interested in like Latinx communities. So we kind of we get siloed a lot into like the boxes that we can check off. And so in Mexico, even though I have done a lot of community work and continue to do a lot of community work in those spaces, because nobody's doing a lot of the community work, then nobody really cares. A lot of times they don't pay attention to what you're doing, and they don't like, you just do your work and you're left alone. But yeah, I think, my work is mostly like people see themselves mirrored in it along the border. So it's most well received in the borderlands region of Mexico.
Maybe you could say a bit more, unless, Benoit, do we have another question from the audience at this time?
No, go ahead.
No? Okay. About these kinds of divides, because it's true that your work is often shown in craft institutions, and rather than being just referred to as an artist, there's a lot of discourse about you being a crafts person. And how do you feel about that? How would you prefer to be seen and talked about?
I mean, I think that's one of the, like career long, like difficulties. It's straddling all these different lines. And for me, a lot of it is directly related to like my border identity. Like if it was a perfect world for me, there would be no divides, and boundaries, obviously, between like craft, art, and design. It's also arbitrary, and it's also like honestly Eurocentric. A lot of times very like misogynist, and a lot of times very like white supremacist. And a lot of that stuff, I mean, I'm always just grateful for having the opportunity to engage these conversations on these like, like high level platforms, like with museums, with educational institutions. So I always am like fine with whatever they decide to call me, because a lot of the identity stuff for me feels like it's more like the labels are about how they want to relate to me, but not about who I am. It's just like how they like balance their own sense of self and belonging. And so I try to not take it too personally and just kind of go along with whatever. But for me, it's all related, and it's all part of like a healthy, like studio ecosystem, a healthy way of being able to explore, like different issues that come up for us, like environmentally, culturally, gender-wise, like working class-wise, like it's hard when you make conceptual work, it takes a long time to sell. So I also, like we need to not like look down on design. Like design is very important. And, so there's all these different things that, these different spaces that are very, very gendered, very, like culturized or whatever, like people are like, oh no, like I don't know, at least in the US there's not a lot of areas where like white folks call themselves artisans, I know which ones there are, but where like like I don't like that people like have all these hierarchies for all these different levels of what they deem to be authentic.
Well, it's so interesting. I don't know why, even looking back at art history and my own studies as a graduate student, I remember asking, why do we always need these ism or is, modernist, postmodernist, syncretist? I mean, this need to classify is classify and corner often. Is really limiting, I think, when you take a look, especially at the really interesting dialogues that can be created between different kinds of practices. And I know that for Jennifer, in curating this exhibition, it was really important that there not be a hierarchy between, industrial design and other forms of design, ceramics, needlework, the needle arts, etc. As we really tried to put forward something that would be precisely non-hierarchical and draw attention to the amazing work that women have been doing that has been for too long overlooked. And we're really, really happy to have you be a part of it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. So excited to be here with you all.
Thank you, Tanya. I would maybe ask, if I may, a question myself about the AMBAS project. You talked about earlier projects. I know you have been working with migrant people on a series of workshops. Would you be able to share some information about this?
Yes, thank you. So it's part of the AMBAS project, a really big project that we started in 2020. So in the pandemic, I started a ceramics program that's all trauma informed. We started at one LGBTQ asylum shelter in Tijuana. And then now we've expanded it to 2 different LGBTQ asylum shelters. So the program, because of COVID, when they closed the border, everybody got trapped in these shelters waiting for refugee status and for asylum. And so, for me, a lot of times I'm thinking about who's the most vulnerable in the communities that I work with, or, whose voice needs to be kind of, amplified and brought up. And so sadly, there's so much homophobia in Latin America and in Tijuana in Mexico. And so I wanted to figure out ways of using crafts in a healing way. And so we started the ceramics program, and there's a therapist at every class. And it's this really, really beautiful thing that has taught us so much. And so we are kind of like constantly figuring out ways of using the different projects that that Ambos has to connect the communities between LA, San Diego, and Tijuana, and sometimes also like even Mexico City, because all of us like should care about each other, and we shouldn't, you know, like be separating ourselves like as people of Mexican descent by, you know, classifications of, you know, Mexican, Mexican American, Chicano, all these different things, all these different labels that separate us from each other. But then also, you know, as people with migrant histories, like we also have to take care of our like migrant brothers and sisters. And so, yeah, I'll show you one thing. So we did this project for Freeze, which is an art fair, you know, that's in LA, New York, and London. So this is a project that we did. We got 43 different artists from LA, San Diego, Tijuana, and Mexico City. So ceramic artists to give us their pieces that were just indicative of their work unfired. And then our students at the shelter did all of the glazing and just did whatever they wanted to the pieces. And they're all glazed in the colors of the trans flag because a lot of our students are trans. And so it was this amazing project that, you know, like connected ceramic artists with ceramic students, and the ceramic students all got to, you know, hold these really wild, massive sculptures. And we got to learn about like different forms and how to work with different clay bodies and different temperatures. Yeah, so we're kind of constantly trying to figure out ways of, again, just kind of like opening up, like who gets to participate, what like art, design, and craft can do, and how we can use it to help our communities.
That's amazing. What an awesome project.
Thank you.
I think, Benoit, I noticed in the Q&A, there might be a couple of other questions that popped up.
Yes. The second question is, do you get invited to bring your work and speak to American students and to school rooms as a practicing artist with complex understanding of identity?
Yes. So I get asked to do that more than I'd like. So yeah, because sadly, you know, there's not a lot of us that can speak to this, you know, like a lot of the different like threads that my work has are like make it, you know, there's not a lot of like women making art about the border with fiber and engaging community and, you know, engaging like also a lot of times politics. So then, yeah, there's very few of us to kind of go around that get constantly asked. There's also very few people of color in craft. So we also get constantly, like we bump into each other, a bunch of us. And then those of us that are people of color working in community engagement also are very few. So then, yeah, there's all these like really tiny worlds that we navigate. So yeah, so I tend to do lectures almost every week with a different institution or yeah, so sometimes it's lectures, sometimes it's interviews. But luckily there's been a few good documentaries that I've been included in from public television. So I try to steer people towards just viewing the videos, showing their classrooms the videos, and their teaching guides for some of those too, that help people through stuff. The Smithsonian right now is putting together a comic book about one of my performances in my life. So there's different avenues that I think I need to, like remind people that already exist so that I like can get back to work. Yeah. So one of them, and I can put them in the chat if anybody's interested, is so there's Art 21, which is a series from PBS. So it's public broadcast television here in the US. And the episode is called Borderlands. And it's so if you search, oh, I spelled it wrong. If you search Borderlands and my name, there's a segment that's just my part. And then if you watch the whole thing, there's 4 of us artists doing different projects about the border. And then Ambos project, Animatrice.com is where you can find more about the Ambos project, and it has all about the ceramics program, but also videos of the different performances that we've done on the border, and some resources for people if they want to find out more about artists at the border, but also getting involved in helping with migration aid.
Fantastic.
Thank you. I think if you agree, Mary, talking about letting you get back to work, I think we're at that moment now.
Thanks. No, I mean, it's great. It's just, yeah, it's a lot, and especially, you know, when a lot of the stuff is difficult stuff to talk about, you know,
Yeah.
when it's just formal and you're like, yeah, this is like made out of this, and these colors are beautiful, and it's, you know, like rooted in joy, like it's different than talking about, you know, like your history, like being a child and experiencing difficulties, and yeah, and like diving back into these spaces. So yeah.
Well, thank you for doing that with us today. It's really great. I feel so lucky to have gotten to meet you across the screen, across the border. And thank you very much.
Yes, thank you guys, and yeah, hopefully one day, yeah, I'll see you up there.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Have a great weekend.
You too. Have a nice rest of your day. Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya.
Bye.